welcome to In Search of the Crystal Skull, an epic adventure into mediocrity. My name is Aaron.
My name is Patricia.
And today we're actually going to do something pretty exciting. For the next two episodes, at least for this month anyway, we are going to be delving into the two only good Disney sequels.
At least according to Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, at least according to Rotten Tomatoes. But there actually are some people who actually do like these movies.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of the Disney direct-to-video sequels, I mean, these ones have actually gotten some pretty decent reviews. And not to say that the other ones haven't, but these are the ones that we've noticed that people said, this isn't complete trash. So, yeah, I think that for the most part, when it comes to the Disney Toon Studios movies, a lot of people tend to flack them and say that they're terrible and they're just a quick cash grab to popularize on the nostalgia of the Disney's movies from the past, especially since this was during the time in which Disney was being overtaken by DreamWorks and Pixar. So, yes, from 1994 all the way up until just a few years ago, I think around 2019, was when we had the Disney Toon Studios producing everything from Return of Jafar to the Tinkerbell movies. So, yeah, it's got a long history of movies. So, and even before then, I mean, it was starting off with theatrical movies such as DuckTales, Treasures of the Lost Lamp, and a Goofy movie, which Aaron and we did discuss about in casual chats on A Goofy Movie and Extremely Goofy Movie. And even Chris, aka Roddy Seymour, and I had discussed about the Disney Toon Studios movies about last year when the company shut down. So, yeah, it's good to know that we're going to be delving deep into this particular episode, especially since this is one of the half of the direct-to-video Disney movies that I had not seen until just recently.
Yeah, and I do believe that actually some people have been suggesting to, not just you yourself, but also to me too, you should watch this movie that we're going to review today, and also another movie that we're going to be watching. Those apparently are the good ones.
Yeah, especially one person in particular. When I posted that episode of the Disney Toon Studios movies podcast, they were specifically saying, why didn't you watch the movie that we're going to be talking about today? And I'm like, I'm sorry?
Well, everybody...
At least we're making up for it.
You can stop writing your complaint letters and you can stop giving us nasty YouTube comments, because finally, we watched it.
Yes, we did.
Okay, so here we go. The Lion King 1.5 is a sequel to the Lion King original movie, but here's the thing about this, this really isn't much of a sequel, it's kind of more of a retelling of an existing story. If that makes sense. So, if anything, we are actually going to be looking through the Lion King, not from Simba's perspective, but from the perspective of Timon and Pumbaa.
Yeah. Now, the idea of this is heavily based off of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which was a tragic comedy written by Tom Stopper. And it's supposed to be an expansion on two minor characters from Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which actually makes sense for Timon and Pumbaa's perspective on Lion King 1.5, as you guys remember that The Lion King was heavily influenced by Hamlet and a little bit of Kimber the White Lion, but we're not going to get into that. So, yes. So, as you guys know from the original as well as the sequel and then this movie, they were all inspired by Shakespeare. The second movie was heavily inspired by Romeo and Juliet. And yeah, so we have basically a telling, kind of like a midquel. So it takes place during the events of The Lion King, before Lion King 2, and even some bits and pieces even before the actual story begins, focusing on what were Timon and Pumbaa's lives like before they even met each other and before they even met Simba. So I've heard mixed opinions about this movie when I first heard about it. I think I remember seeing this in a trailer in a Disney movie that I was watching. I don't remember which one, but I think that when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, interesting. I do know that there was the Timon and Pumbaa animated series that came out in the late 90s to coincide with the popularity of The Lion King. So I was like, so is this kind of the movie based off of the cartoon? It's no, it's actually a movie that is retelling slash prequel slash midquel of The Lion King. And I was like, okay, I mean, that sounds interesting, but I never saw it. I mean, it was one of the handful of Disney direct-to-video movies that I've never seen. And, for many years, I've heard people giving their own opinions, whether it be like, oh, it's the movie that a lot of people really liked, but then it's the one that not a lot of people cared for. It was like towards the middle. And and then you told me about it, Aaron, and I was like, okay, I guess we could, take a look into this.
Yeah, I was quite surprised because at the very beginning when you said to me, "Oh, we've already looked at the Disney direct-to-DVD movies," but then I suggested, "Well, have you seen this movie?" And he was like, "No," and he was kind of like, "You have to see this." Because and I say to everybody else as well, I would actually, even at the very get-go, I would say, before you even read this review, if you've not watched Lion King 1.5, I would suggest you go see it to get the idea of what we're talking about and then come back to us. So if you want to pause the episode and if you want to go watch it now, we'll still be here when you get back, so, do it right now. So,
absolutely. And yes, you can actually watch it on Disney Plus. So all the Lion King series is up there. The original Lion King 2, Lion King 1.5. I think that the Lion Guard is probably there, and maybe the Timon and Pumbaa animated series. I don't know if that's there yet.
Here's the thing about it. I remember you saying about the Timon and Pumbaa animated series, and here's another thing about this. I can understand why I think some people were, after watching Timon and Pumbaa the animated series, I can understand why they're disappointed with this movie. Because I feel like, because if you remember, the Timon and Pumbaa went for 4 seasons.
Yes.
It was a very successful Disney series. Pretty much,
absolutely.
I think it's up there with, dare I say, it's up there with DuckTales, and dare I say, it's up there with Goof Troop. But when Timon and Pumbaa hit the scene, and everybody loved them on Saturday morning TV, everything like that. So you think that a movie where your main protagonists are going, in this instance, are going to be Timon and Pumbaa, and they're going to basically talk about their origin story, and they're going to talk about that. You can, after being spoiled so much with the TV series and knowing so much about the characters and seeing them evolve and getting into all sorts of situations, you think, oh wow, they're going to go all out with this movie. You would have thought. But no, But in a way, unfortunately, the big problems. I think maybe we'll get to the negatives first. I think probably before we get to the positives, because I think many people will want us to comment on this as well. The one thing I'll definitely say about 1.5 is that I feel like it's a bit too restrictive. I think in regards to where it sets itself, because keep this in mind, they pretty much still tell it within the confines of the Prideland. Pretty much.
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty much there in the background, Pride Rock, at the very beginning of the whole thing. He's literally there. And so the idea is that Timon is a meerkat who is living amongst another family of meerkats. Though, funny enough, I don't know if you actually picked up on this, Patricia, or not. But surprisingly, in this situation, the mother is actually alive and the dad is no longer around.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting reversal. It's usually when it comes to these Disney movies, especially focusing on the princesses, it's usually that the father's still around but the mother's dead. But I guess in this situation it kind of makes a little sense, because even in the Lion King, Mufasa dies. It's kind of like a reverse. So yeah, that's actually pretty surprising. And I guess they decided to make up for a fatherly figure because it does feature Timon's Uncle Max.
Yeah, but as you know, he's overly critical, and he's just basically just a misery guts. Pretty much, he's like he's like if Oscar the Grouch was a meerkat. Basically,
he's your classic curmudgeon, yeah.
Yeah, so Timon obviously doesn't fit in with this crowd. He tries to do everything he possibly can, but then ends up just kind of making a mess of everything and angering everybody. But here's the thing about this, can you, when you look at his family, I mean, can you kind of blame Timon for kind of being a bit, is it really fair to kind of blame him for when stuff's going wrong? Because in the very first instant, when they're doing the whole musical number, by the way, there's a lot of musical numbers in this, surprisingly enough.
Yeah, but here's the thing. There are a lot of musical numbers, but it's a mixture of, classic songs from The Lion King mixed with pop songs, because it's the 2000s. Apparently, we don't have any creativity to write our own music anymore.
Well, to be fair, in the original Lion King, the Lion Sleeps Tonight is one of the songs in the movie. So,
sure, but that's only one instance. But there were many others. There was the theme song to Good and the Bad and the Ugly, and there was various other pop songs and various other things that featured. And then as a mixture, there was also Can You Feel the Love Tonight and Hakuna Matata, which of course Hakuna Matata had to be there. I mean, there's no question. But then there was also, I Can't Wait to Be King and The Circle of Life. So yeah, it does have the classic Lion King soundtrack, but also it features a new song when we first get introduced to the Meerkats called That's All I Need. And that's the only original song in this movie.
But it was a fun song, to say the least.
Sure. I mean, I have to say that. I mean, as opposed to pretty much every single direct-to-video Disney movie, they have most original songs, and a lot of them are either very mediocre or they're just terrible. Yeah. At least compared to the original.
Here's the funny thing about this, though. It's I think it's one of the very few. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Patricia, but that song I think started the movie off. At the very beginning, we all talk about how the Lego Movie started the whole kind of the musical, the big musical scene. In all the movies I came across that, the Lorax and things like that. But originally they were still doing things like this at the very beginning because obviously they had this movie, and then obviously they had Goof Troop as well. They started off with the whole I'm leaving high school kind of deal and things like that.
Oh yeah, Goofy movie, right. But here's the thing. I mean, around the 2000s, it was kind of dying off because the musical formula, I mean, a lot of people were just getting sick and tired of musicals. I mean, a lot of the music that was featured in animated films were already established songs, like we saw in a lot with DreamWorks. Pixar used original soundtracks, but I mean, very rarely, if not at all, do we hear singing. I mean, you have You Got a Friend in Me and When Somebody Loves Me and those kind of songs, yes, but there wasn't 5 or 6 or 7 songs that the characters would just be singing outright. So yeah, the 2000s was not a decade where we did see a lot of that. We saw maybe one popular song that'll be going throughout the rest of the movie, and then interspliced with the soundtrack and the background music and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that when the 2010s came along, with movies like the Lego Movie and even the huge comeback with Princess and the Frog and Tangled and Frozen, in which we got musicals again. So the 2000s were kind of rough for Disney in particular because a lot of their movies that were released didn't exactly gelled with pretty much anybody. I mean, Atlantis: The Lost Empire was a failure, and then there was Treasure Planet, which was probably one of the biggest bombs that ever released on Disney. And then a few years later, they tried to pick themselves up. I mean, they did with Lilo and Stitch. That was their most successful movie that they released that decade.
Well, Lilo and Stitch was a massive different thing, wasn't it? Compared to whatever Disney had done previously. I think
that's true. And then they tried to copy off of Pixar with releasing things like Chicken Little, and then they try to do the whole DreamWorks thing with The Wild, trying to cap on the popularity of Madagascar. So yeah, they experimented and a lot of it kind of failed until they went back to basics in 2009 with The Princess and the Frog, and then that pretty much just kickstarted things back up again. But for the longest time, the only thing that they had left on their repertoire were their direct-to-video movies. And even then, a lot of people criticized them. So, yeah, I mean, at least with one of the later direct-to-video movies, because it stopped in 2008 with John Lasseter saying, as soon as you're done with The Little Mermaid, Ariel's Beginnings, you're done. And then they focused more on the airplane and plane movies, and then they did the Tinkerbell movies, and then that studio's completely gone. So, yeah, I think that when looking into how, Lion King 1.5 fits in, as in, one of the last of the direct-to-video Disney movies, it actually turned out better than most of the stuff that came out before and even some afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So you can get an idea of why Lion King 1.5 gets already a mixed opinion, because obviously there's people who come from watching the Timon and Pumbaa animated series and coming from that side of things, and then there's people who come from dredging their way through the direct-to-DVD movies and realizing how terrible they are, and then they finally get a Lion King 1.5. It's they can do something right.
Yeah, so. And not to mention, I would say that Lion King, with its trilogy of movies, is up there with Aladdin with the trilogy of movies, in which it's hey, these movies aren't terrible, because we have The Lion King 2, which many people consider to be really good. A lot of people really love Lion King 2 because they love the story of Kiara and Kovu. They like some of the music, He Lives in You, and deception, disgrace, evil as fate, as, anyway. But yeah, a lot of people love that movie just as much as the original. But and then you have Lion King 1.5, which is focusing on Timon and Pumbaa, which we already did get with the TV series. So it was kind of like a nice way to bring things in. I mean, we already knew about what happened afterwards, so let's find out what happened in between.
Yeah,
and I think
so
that
the whole idea of this is going to be that it's like a part prequel, but then a part retelling, and then obviously there's other stuff that comes off out of that as well. Like it's so. Well, one thing that goes in with all of this madness that you think was a bit convoluted, I think, for a movie like this. All of a sudden, like there's Timon and Pumbaa also telling it from looking at it from the third person as well, where they're actually like pausing the movie and then commenting on it, aka Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yeah, and I remember that was actually part of the trailer where they were just like watching and rewinding and all that kind of stuff, and you thought, oh, this is like a funny little gag. But no, that's actually the whole movie. The whole movie is like this, where they would stop to get snacks or go to the restroom, or other characters will be coming in to watch the movie. So yeah, like this is actually part of the atmosphere of the movie, and it actually works because they're actually spoofing themselves, saying like, oh, remember this, let's just fast forward this. I'm glad that they're able to have a little bit of meta humor with this.
Mm-hmm. So basically, we're going back to the story. Like, we've gone way far away from that because we're too busy doing Disney commentary.
Well, I mean, we did needed to bring some context because you have to remember that what Disney was going through at the time, and why people actually may have not cared for it, or maybe were kind of mixed when it first came out. But now I think that the harsh criticism has kind of died away since then, and a lot of people are looking at it pretty fondly.
I don't know. I think if you look at the former nostalgia chick, she still doesn't like this movie.
That's true. I mean, she has mentioned in her dishonorable mentions about how she doesn't like The Lion King 1.5. She said, Timon and Pumbaa fucked up a good movie. So, yeah. I mean, but here's the thing: like, she's actually seen every single DVD Disney movie, and I have not, so I cannot be the judge of that. Although the ones that I have
soon
seen,
you'll. I mean, obviously we've watched. This is one of the two that we've watched. Soon you'll be watching the next one. So
that is true. Yeah,
you'll get there eventually. You'll have one over Lindsay eventually. So yeah.
Well, we'll see. Okay. But yeah, the one thing that I definitely noticed when watching the first act was that didn't it kind of remind you a little bit of A Bug's Life, in which like you have the awkward aunt who was like outthinker, who was basically different from everybody else, and he constantly screws up, and they're like, go to this position. No, we can't do that because he screwed up. Okay, go to this position. Nah, he messed up. And then everybody hates him except for that one particular person. For A Bug's Life, it was Dot, who absolutely thought that Flick was a genius. And in this case with The Lion King 1.5, it's Timon's mother, who, it's obvious when you first listen to the movie. I mean, I immediately heard this. She's voiced by Julie Kavner, aka Marge Simpson from The Simpsons.
Uh-huh. And mind you, one thing I'll say in defense of it being compared to A Bug's Life is that at the very end of that skit, though, that they sent him away on what they thought was an impossible mission to go grab some soldier bugs to basically go fight the grasshoppers. And so, but in this instance, Timon makes the proactive decision to go away from his family to basically make himself anew. So.
That is true. I will give him that. Yeah. So he knew that he was causing trouble for his family when he was standing on guard, trying to make sure that the hyenas wouldn't come in. And then while he was doing like his little dance, and then the hyenas come sneaking in and they start terrorizing all of the meerkats to the point in which they need to hide underground, and everybody's just looking at him mad because they almost got killed.
I'm trying to remember the comment I said about when we went into that whole montage of him basically falling into the colors. I can't remember what I said about that. Actually, it was something hilarious. It was
yeah. I mean, I think that when we were listening to their conversation, it's like, yeah, let's we're gonna have dinner and a show, and then whole chasing around and trying to mess around with them, and we have Timon just like trying to like warn everybody, and then he ends up seeing all the disasters that the hyenas are doing to the meerkats. And then
this is one thing that we didn't mention about, actually. there's not really. I mean, the hyenas are there, but I wouldn't say they're like, like main antagonists of the movie, would you? Like, they appeared at the
No,
beginning and then appeared at the end, pretty much.
yeah, like they're not really the antagonists, and neither is Scar because you only see him at the end of the movie. So yeah, there's not really much of an antagonist here. I mean, the only conflict that is going on in this movie is that Timon and Pumbaa are two outcasts who, for whatever reason, they feel out of place in society, and then they try to see if they can be able to make something of themselves. Obviously with Timon, he feels like the black sheep of his family, and so he goes off and tries to do his own thing. He tries to find his paradise, and then we have Pumbaa, which is pretty not surprising considering of what we know of his character, that he tends to release his flatulence and everybody just like completely faints every time he does it. And so he goes away. And then when they first meet, Timon is like, oh, you can be like my bodyguard while I try to find my paradise. And then Pumbaa basically says, oh, I know this place. It's a green place filled with waterfalls and grass and all the bugs you can eat. It's basically the same oasis that we saw in the first movie.
There's one thing I want to comment during while all of this is going on is that, but as they obviously go through all these skits, they're actually kind of like showing that they had some kind of influence on the first movie. So like, and I don't know if this is actually. Here's the thing about this: can we actually say Lion King 1.5 is canon?
You know what? The continuity is completely botched. I'm just going to let you know multiple reasons. Number one, Timon knows who Rafiki is. Nowhere in the first movie would he know who Rafiki is, because when Nala came into the picture and, she tried to convince Simba to come home to the Pridelands, and because Scar is ruining everything, and then Simba goes away, and then Rafiki meets up with him, and then he's convinced to go home. So when Nala's looking for Simba, going back into Timon and Pumbaa, we have Rafiki approaching them saying the king has returned, and then Timon said, who's the monkey? Which means he's never met him. And then before Timon meets Pumbaa, Rafiki comes along and says, look beyond what you see. And he's basically telling him of, where he's going to go. So Timon has met up with Rafiki, which is a huge continuity error.
Either that or Rafiki has a twin brother. That's basically how they probably explain it away.
No. I'm not going to give you that. Sorry.
Or is the thing? Maybe it's probably like, I don't know. Maybe he's just like there's like Rafiki might just kind of like be like a metaphor for something. Maybe I don't know. Like there's probably like in different instances of the Lion King, story. Maybe there's like a Rafiki in every kind of like kind of like maybe he's like supposed to be kind of like maybe a spiritual. I don't know. I
think it's in my opinion it's just lazy writing. It's like.
Yeah,
and also another thing is that Timon knows about Pride Rock. Like if you remember from when Simba returns to Pride Rock and he saw it in shambles, and then when Timon and Pumbaa finally catch up to them, he's saying like, "Oh, we're gonna fight your uncle for this," and he's like, it sounded like he had never seen Pride Rock before, but now we've seen throughout the movie that he has seen it before because he was actually there when they were going over to Pride Rock so that they can be able to find an oasis, and they just so happened to be at the ceremony when Simba was born.
I think one thing they probably should have explained in the movie, and this is a critique I probably have as well, maybe they should have hinted in that they were basically doing some creative license with their storytelling of what they like of their version of the Lion King and what they saw. And maybe they were just maybe that's probably one they were. I mean, they didn't explain that in the movie. They didn't do that at all. But I think they probably should have put in there this is not what really kind of happened. It's more kind of Timon and Pumbaa's thought of what they thought happened.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. Like toward the end of the movie when they were watching it, maybe Simba would have came along or Rafiki would have came along and said, "Oh, but that's not how it actually happened." And then maybe they would have explained but what about this scene? It's like, no, it was actually this scene is what happened. So maybe that would have been a little bit more clever if they maybe put a little twist into it. It's like, oh, but we were there throughout the entire time. So yeah, I could probably see that, but no, they never referenced that whatsoever.
It would have been funny if someone said that, to Simba, how would you know what had happened?
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. It was an absurd telling of their tale, and then at the very end of the movie, all the main characters would come in and start picking it apart. That would have been funny.
That would have been funny, yeah. And they basically like squeezed themselves in for multiple scenes that we are familiar with in the movie. I mean, they were there with the whole group of animals with, I can't wait to be king, and they were the ones responsible for knocking down the animals in the first place.
Wait, yeah,
And
also, this is a massive, massive continuity error as well, because it's like, I would have accepted if, like, he was like, oh, they just met up with these animals and like, they were, like, rehearsing for when they would do that whole thing, maybe, and that could have been, like, a joke in itself. Like, the animals, like, all rehearse all their music numbers, if you will, and
sure,
like so when when like Simba comes around, they can like impress the future king and stuff like that. If that was an explanation for that, but no, it just comes out of nowhere, and it just comes like the next day after they've only just found like this paradise that's quote unquote paradise that Timon has found.
yeah.
So yeah, that in itself skews the whole story because it makes you think that Simba grew up in like a day, which obviously is
Yeah,
not what
that's
happened.
right. Because you had one day in which they arrived at this quote unquote paradise where, the day that Simba was born. And then literally the next day was when they were singing, I just can't wait to be king. It's like Simba didn't just grow up in a day, it actually happened over the course of maybe a few weeks, a few months. I don't, the time loop is actually really confusing.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, in regards to other one thing I will say about this movie, which I'm actually quite impressed by, this may be a Disney Toon Studios movie, but wouldn't you argue that this potentially could have been released in theaters?
Sure. I mean, the animation does look on par with the original Lion King. I mean, I'm surprised that this wasn't released in theaters because, first of all, The Jungle Book 2 and Peter Pan 2 was released in theaters, at least in Europe, I think.
Yeah, in the
But
UK it was because I think it was coinciding with keep in mind Peter Pan Peter Pan Returns to Neverland was coinciding with the Second World War, so I think they would have. I'm trying to remember when it was released. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it did coincide with the we have Remembrance Day every November, so
sure.
it probably might have coincided with that. Maybe that's the reason why they probably theatrically released it, but
That's exactly what it was because I think it was released around November.
yeah, it was. So I mean, so I think that's probably the reason why it would have been released in theaters, at least in the UK. I mean, here's the thing about this: we got recess schools out in theaters here in the
So
UK.
did we.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you? Okay, then I thought it was only just us that got
It,
that.
it,
But
it was a theatrical movie, but most of the only Disney Toon Studios movies that were ever released in theaters were obviously DuckTales, Search of the Treasure of the Lost Lamp. Then there was a Goofy movie, and then there was the Peter Pan Return to Neverland and the Jungle Book 2. None of the other movies were released in theaters, and it's I guess because let's be honest, I mean, a lot of the animation for like the direct-to-video movies are not very good. I mean, like originally, Return of Jafar was supposed to be released in theaters, but at the last minute, they decided to switch over to direct-to-video to coincide with the Aladdin TV series as was just going to start. And if you look at the quality of the animation, it looks terrible.
yeah,
So yeah, I at least with Lion King 1.5, I'm sure that they actually got a little bit more time and were able to get the resources that they needed, especially since it was around the 2000s. I'm sure that they were able to maybe pull out some of the original assets of their animation so that they can be able to work around, the animation of their movies. So a lot of time had passed since then. I mean, it was released almost 10 years after the original Lion King. So they were able to better in their technology as opposed to like when they first started doing those direct-to-video movies in the 90s. So yeah, I mean, this could have been a movie that could have been easily released in theaters, maybe to coincide with the 10th anniversary of The Lion King, which they would release in theaters a few years later. So I'm surprised that they didn't do that.
well, so yeah, I mean that could have been a possibility. I don't know, but besides, obviously telling how Timon and Pumbaa meet, and obviously be telling, Timon's backstory, and obviously setting his story over. I mean, the rest of it basically is The Lion King with some exceptions. When you really think about it, because I mean, let's just go through them all. So there's the bit where they themselves rescue themselves from the gazelles, obviously from being trampled upon on them, and the stampede. And then there's the bit where they end up finding the paradise that they want, and getting the Hakuna Matata, if you will. And then they get to the bit where they finally find Simba, and obviously they rescue him from where he is. And but then there's the bit where Nalika hits the scene, and then they finally go, they grow up, he grows up and everything like that, and he gets into that. But mind you, here's the thing about this, which kind of made me feel a bit uncomfortable about when we get to this point. The bit when Timon and Pumbaa tried to split up Simba and Nala. In that bit, which is kind of like, that's a pretty dick thing to do for someone that you've previously been brought up and, treated as your friend for a very long time.
Yeah, and the reason why is because they're Timon and Pumbaa and Simba, they were trying to run away from their past and they don't like change. I get it. Like, Timon is the happiest he's ever been, and so has Pumbaa. And then when Simba came along, they basically raised him as their son. I mean, they did everything together. They swam together, they ate bugs and creatures together, they talked together, they did a lot of things together. And so when Nala comes into the picture and they basically wants to take Simba away from all of that, it's like, oh, she's ruining what our lives were. So they try to split them up. And basically it's like, Hakuna Matata, no worries, no responsibilities. Essentially, they were trying to save Simba from his responsibilities as the king of the Pridelands. They thought that they were doing good for their friend, but instead, no. It just makes them come across as like, oh, they're just being really narcissistic and pretty selfish. It's like, oh, we're not going to let this girl take away everything that we've worked hard for. It does come across as a bit, nasty.
Yeah, and it comes across as very selfish. I think I would say for our characters. Mind you, I think we get to the point where, mind you, they get to the point where Pumbaa decides that, oh hey, Simba is our friend and he needs our help. But then obviously Timon believes that I finally got everything that I need. I don't need anything else. And so I mean, again, I think Timon obviously comes across as mind you, I guess you could say this is the character arc he's been kind of going on really. In this regard, and like he's you feel like he's already been out of place in other places, and doesn't want to be, and he finally got what he wants. And he doesn't want anyone to mess it up for him, I guess. And so I guess you can see his point of view in that regard, in the way that we were introduced to him in the very beginning of the movie. But I mean, at the same time, I would say that I'm really glad that obviously he went on his arc. But then obviously we get the whole thing with Rafiki, and he, as you said before, he's not supposed to know who he is, and yet he has a big pivotal moment in his story arc. In the main arc of him going off to go help Simba and obviously rescue the Prideland from Scar.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which I mean, it's kind of I know that like toward the end of the movie, Rafiki approaches Timon for the second time and he's like, you know what you must do, right? And then he's like, all right, I know what I have to do. I have to go back into the Pridelands. I have to find my best friends and I have to help them out. And then Rafiki nods his head, and then Timon, rushes really quickly.
Yeah, what I really liked about that was like, didn't you feel he had a bit of a freakazoid kind of like feeling to that when they did that? Like, you think that was something that freakazoid would do when he meets like something like old mentor, like he would basically take all the words out of his mouth and just to kind of go on his own side, and then like he just kind of like left there to like not say anything. And yet he's like supposed to be
exactly.
So yeah, in a way that bit was funny. It's just too bad it didn't make any sense.
Yeah, not really, no. Especially since if you saw from the original movie, in which when Nala was explaining to Timon and Pumbaa about what the situation at Pride Rock, that Simba has an uncle Scar, and Scar let the hyenas into the Pride Lands where they destroyed everything, and Simba needs to go back there so that he can be able to take his place as king. And in the original, Timon and Pumbaa immediately got it, but in Lion King 1.5, they're struggling with it and not understanding, and Nala has to explain it for a million times. That didn't happen in the original. They immediately understood it when Nala calmed herself down and then she explained it with very few sentences, and they were like, okay, let's go and help our friend. But I mean, admittedly, with Pumbaa would be the type of character who would immediately say, "Okay, Simba needs our help. He's our friend. We need to go after him." And Timon would be the kind of character who would say, "No, we got everything that we want right here. We had Hakuna Matata before Simba, and we'll have it after Simba." And then the line that really struck me was when Timon was asking him, who's your friend? Whose side are you on? And then Pumbaa said, I was about to ask you the same thing. Whose side are you on? Who's your friend? So Yeah, I think that that was really touching, especially with everything that they've gone through. Now, I mean, they've had Simba for years. I mean, from what I understand in what Lions terms, in which the amount of time that goes from a lion cub to a full grown lion is about 3 years. So they've lived in paradise. They've did their Hakuna Matata. They've lived with no worries and responsibilities for 3 years. And for that to go away in an instant, I'm sure that would have been a huge shock for Timon. It's like, oh man, now I need to actually do responsibilities. I need to help my friend out with his family struggles and trying to get his land back. So I take it that that was a lot of things that Timon was going through in his head.
hmm And also, one thing interesting to note that as Simba grows older, he's still portrayed by Matthew Broderick in Simba
Yeah,
in this, which
exactly.
makes me think that Inspector Gadget was probably more of a failure than we were led on to believe. But for Matthew
Yeah.
Broderick, but yeah, so he's obviously still going back to do the direct-to-DVD sequels. So,
I mean, to be fair, Disney has always been really consistent with their voice actors. They've always casted the same actors who was in the original movie. They did it with Aladdin, with the exception of Robin Williams, but we already know the story, so we're not going to get into that.
mhm.
But for the most part, they have been pretty consistent with their casting, and a lot of these people love to play as their characters. Like James Woods, he wants to have every chance he can to play as Hades, whether it be in the TV series or direct-to-video movies or with the Kingdom Hearts games. If he has the opportunity to play as Hades, he'll be in it.
Didn't he
And I'm
also
sure.
do some of the stuff with the Magic Kingdom as well in Disney
Yes,
World?
he did.
He did. Okay,
Yes.
then cool. Yeah. So yeah, he's still in it he's still in it to win it pretty much. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'm just like
exactly.
it's I don't know. Like I always find it a bit weird. It's maybe I'm just having for the fact that Jim Carrey never comes back to barely play his character roles. When in either in series or TV series. Based on what he's paid. I
I
don't
mean,
know,
to be
but
fair, Jim Carrey is, I mean, at least at the time, was way more expensive to get than Matthew Broderick. I
I
mean,
probably would
Jim,
imagine. Yeah.
yeah, Jim Carrey was in the Ace Ventura movies. He was in The Mask. He was in Batman Forever, Dumb and Dumber, The Cable Guy, The Truman Show, Man on the Moon. He was in everything. He was like one of the top stars of the 90s. While Matthew Broderick, on the other hand, I mean, sure, we had Ferris Bueller's Day Off and then The Lion King. And then, he did a lot of his stuff on Broadway, which led up to him doing the producers. But as for like main actor to like try to get like a replacement, I mean, the only time in which that did happen was with the Lion Guard, and they brought in Rob Lowe to do it, which I still don't know why they didn't cast Matthew Broderick, but that's beside the point. But the point is, yeah, Matthew Broderick was back in, and so was Nathan Lane for Timon and Ernie Sabala and Pumbaa, which not too surprising. Nathan Lane, again very similar to Matthew Broderick, huge in Broadway. I mean, again, he was in the producers alongside with Matthew Broderick, and then Ernie Sabala. He was actually in the That's So Raven TV series as the teacher. So yeah, they do have connections there, and obviously we do have like Whoopi Goldberg, and we have Cheech Marin, we have Jim Cummings. So yeah, we have the usual.
That's another thing I
contenders.
was actually going to comment on. Like, given the fact that this is a direct-to-DVD, movie, like it does have some star power behind it when you really
Yeah.
think about it. So, like, maybe there was a possibility that they may have changed their mind at one point and said, hey, we might take a gamble here and put this on a big screen and see if it makes any money. It's like
Yeah,
it's.
maybe. Yeah, exactly. Like I'm surprised that that didn't happen. And just, I think that maybe, from what I understand, maybe that the Jungle Book 2 didn't do very well when it was released in theaters.
hmm
Uh, and I think that, when was Peter Pan the movie released in
Oh,
theaters?
I can't remember exactly, but it's. I think if it was fair, they didn't want to take another gamble again because obviously they didn't do
Okay,
too
it
well the
came out
last
in,
time.
okay, I have it right here. 2002, that's when it came out. So
2002. So
if,
this was
if,
2 years. Lion King 1.5 was 2 years after Return to Neverland.
Yeah, so if Return to Neverland was 2002 and Jungle Book was 2003, and if they didn't make a dent in the theaters, maybe that's why they couldn't release Lion King 1.5 in theaters. They're probably like, oh man, it's not even worth it.
So, I mean, there's not really much else to kind of cover really in regards to the Lion King 1.5. I mean, the only thing I basically would just say to you is like, if you think some of the crazy stuff we're going kind of go over, I would just say watch it. I mean, like, we pretty much just tell like the rest of the story of the Lion King from Timon and Pumbaa's perspective. at this point.
Well,
Like,
you mentioned of the ending. The ending, well, I mean, not the ending where Simba reclaims his spot as king. I'm talking about Timon's ending, in which he actually brings his family over to the paradise oasis, where Timon and Pumbaa have been living for years. They actually live there now, and Timon and Pumbaa were living there for a bit. And then in The Lion King 2, when Kiara is born, Timon and Pumbaa are there as Tiara's watch guards. So yeah, I guess they stayed there for maybe like a brief minute until they were called back to the Pride Rock saying, "Hey, I need you to watch over my daughter so that she doesn't get into trouble." So, yeah, I guess it kind of like ends in a very interesting note with them living in paradise, and Timon and Pumbaa finally finds his place amongst his family and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so just a bit of trivia, I guess, to kind of wrap things up a little bit, is that so the film reveals that Timon's origin and how he and Pumbaa met each other, became friends. However, there's different stories revealed to Timon and Pumbaa episodes. Once Upon a Timon, this may indicate that Timon and Pumbaa, or just that episode that Lion King 1.5, existed in different continuities from each other. So there was already an origin story, like in Timon and Pumbaa itself, called Once Upon a Timon, but obviously Lion King 1.5 seemed to skip over that. Pretty
Of
much.
course
So,
it does,
yeah.
because I mean, even with like Ariel's beginnings, the third Little Mermaid movie, that's a prequel that takes place before Ariel meets up with Flounder, and this takes place even before that Ariel meets up with Prince Eric and Scuttle. It contradicts with the animated series, because the animated series that came out in the early 90s, the sisters that Ariel has have completely different personalities than what happened in the movie. Then there was also the case about like, Ariel knew about Ursula and all those kind of things. So yeah, this is like another attempt in which like you have the movie that has a different continuity from what the TV show already presented. So it's like, which continuity do we follow?
Well, not only that, I mean, like, obviously this is a different example, but, back in Pixmix when we did Monsters University, that pretty much retold the story of Mike and Sully when they first got together, but in the original movie, they said they've been known each other since the 4th grade, but apparently
That
in
is
this,
true,
in this
yeah.
movie, that, Disney aren't very good at continuity, are they? When
No,
you really
not
think about
really.
it. Again, I wonder how on earth they've managed to keep Toy Story so linear this entire time. When you think about it. Yeah,
Well,
just.
like I guess because Toy Story is different from the lines of all the other Disney movies, because it's Pixar, and Pixar, when it comes to like that universe, it's like it has to be kind of consistent, because we already had the 4 movies. We had the Buzz Lightyear Mission of Star Command, the pilot movie, which we discussed about in Pixmix, and then we have the Buzz Lightyear animated series. So that's the thing. Like, we already know that with that continuity, it's a TV show that is focusing on Buzz Lightyear as a character. So it's not in continuity with the franchise. It's a completely different continuity, which makes sense.
Yeah, but like it's also on top of that as well. Like the Buzz Lightyear in the cartoon show is a different Buzz Lightyear from the Buzz Lightyear of Andy's room. If you really think about
Exactly.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
So in a
It's
way,
the
yeah,
actual Buzz Lightyear.
yeah. Well, a cartoon Buzz Lightyear, if you will. Like,
Well, sure,
yeah. Good
but
grief.
you know what I'm saying.
Imagine there's gonna be imagine they do this whole remember that episode of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles where all the Ninja Turtles and like all the different dimensions all came together,
Yes.
from that, imagine they did about Buzz Lightyear one day. I don't know.
I mean, I guess the closest thing that happened was in like Toy Story 2, but yeah, but that would be kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Anyway, but yeah, I have the reviews right here from Rotten Tomatoes. So, according to the Tomato Meter, it has a 78% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the audience score saying it's a 62%. So I'm going to read off some of the reviews that some people say right here. So, we have from let's see, Andy Patrizio from IGNmovies.com. It'll provide plenty of laughs for kids, but adults who love the original film will not find much to hold their interest. It's moderately funny. After that, you roll your eyes. 7 out of 10. And then we have another review from let's see, Bradley. No, that's a fan one. Okay, here it is. From Splicewire, Rob Blackwelder says most Disney straight-to-video sequels are bunk, but here's an entertaining exception. And then we had somebody who didn't like it, James Plath from Movie Metropolis, say The Lion King 1.5 is a very clever sequel, but that's entertaining in the beginning, but it's weighed down by a premise and format that seemed ill-suited for a full-length release. So yeah.
But Patricia, it doesn't really matter what they think at the end of the day in Search of this Crystal Skull. It matters what we think.
That is true. So let's rank it, shall we?
Yeah. So, in regards to this, here's the thing about this. I actually think Lion King 1.5 isn't actually as bad as everybody says it is. Yes, it's got problems, absolutely. But, the music's good, the animation is good. Obviously, Timon and Pumbaa are funny in this movie, no doubt about that. They sometimes fall a bit flat on certain things, and obviously the story gets a bit mixed up in that time, but I'd be very cruel to kind of give it anything lower than a 6, to be quite honest with you. So I think I will go probably 7 again. I think probably for this one, so I think 7's probably a fair mark for it.
7 is definitely a fair mark. It has its really funny moments, but then it has moments that makes you question its continuity. So yeah, this is definitely one of the better DVD Disney sequels that I've seen. It's far better than like Little Mermaid 2 or Beauty and the Beast Enchanted Christmas or Belle's Magical World or anything like that. So I've seen worse. So saying that this is actually one of the worst direct-to-video Disney sequels, I don't think so. So in my opinion, it's pretty decent. 7 out of 10.
Okay. So, with that out of the way, coming up next after this episode of In Search of the Crystal Skull, we are going to be looking at the second of the best, we can assume, direct-to-DVD Disney sequels, and that movie is going to be Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time.
Yes, what many people consider to be the best direct-to-video Disney sequel ever made. Is it? Well, you'll find out next time.
Okay, take care everybody, and we'll see you again later.
Bye-bye for now.